In the previous lesson, we defined two new components called tacos and burritos. And I have the two files open side by side so that we can compare these two components. And very quickly, we can observe that they are very similar. They both receive a single prop called items, which is going to be an array. They both call the map method on that array to produce an array of JSX, right? And the only difference between the two is that the tacos component returns an array of taco card components, while the burritos component returns an array of burrito card components. So the only difference is on line 5 right here. It's the hard-coded component that is actually being stored for each element in my original items array. So my question for you in this lesson is this: can we consolidate these two components into one? Can we have just one component that can serve either purpose from these two, but without duplicating the code across two files? We're going to attempt to solve this problem right now. So I'm going to create a new component that's going to be a replacement for these two, and I'm going to give it a generic name of food items. So right here, I will create fooditems.jsx. All right. Then what I'm going to do is copy over the component code from either my tacos or burritos component. It doesn't matter. So in this case, I'm just going to go to burritos, and I'm going to copy everything from line 3 down to line 9. So just the component declaration and the export. And immediately in here, I will replace burritos right here with food items, and also replace the export default syntax right here with food items as well. Okay, so we have a food items component that accepts an items prop and is iterating over it with map and producing an array of components. The only problem, of course, is that we still have this hard-coded burrito card reference, right? So in this current scenario, this food items component is basically a duplicate or replica of our burritos component on the right. So how can we make this bit of content dynamic, right? Well, if you think about the kind of solutions we've explored previously in the course, we've learned about props before. A prop, of course, is just an input that the parent component can provide to a component whenever it is rendered. So here's a crazy idea that I'd like for you to consider, a clever idea as well. What if the parent component that rendered food items provided a dynamic component to inject right here, to return right here? Could we do that? Well, let's give it a shot. So let's assume that the parent component, whenever it is rendering a food items component, will provide a component prop. And I'm going to assume that that component prop will be some React component. I don't know which one in advance, and perhaps it could be this thing or this thing. It might be a taco card, a burrito card, maybe another type of card that I have not seen before, right? It's going to be some kind of component. But whatever the parent gives me, I can simply render right here. So you might be tempted to write component like so, but it's actually not going to work in React, because in React, our components must start with a capital letter. But that's not going to be a problem, because what we can do right here is simply use our ES6 alias syntax, which basically allows us to provide another name for a property when we destructure it from an object. So what I'm going to do is take my component property and simply rename it component with a capital C, and that allows us to use component here with a capital C, and that should work. So once again, we don't know what this component will be in advance. It could be anything. The parent is going to decide that whenever it renders a food items component. All that we're going to do is iterate over the items array with the map method and produce an array of whatever component the parent tells me to produce. Now, obviously, that component must support the name and image prop. Otherwise, it's not going to be able to play the role that's expected of it. But other than that, this can be anything. It can be a taco card, or it can be a burrito card, and the code should work either way. So with that, let's save this file. Let's open up app.jsx or app.js and try this new component out. So let me open up app.js, and at the very top here, we can import my new food items component. All right, now as it turns out, it looks like we have some unused code right here. We are no longer referencing taco card and burrito card, but we may need it in just a second. So we'll come back to here in just a moment. But let me scroll down, and right here is where we had our two renderings, right, of the food items component, the tacos component and the burritos component. I want to replace these two component renders with two renders of food items. So let's compare the before and after. So right here, I'm going to replace my tacos component right here by rendering food items, right? It still needs a items prop. Let me remind you of what food items looks like on the right-hand side, by the way. Here it is. So food items still needs an items prop, and I'm going to give it the tacos array from above. But now this component, this new component, also needs a component prop to represent the component it's going to return during the map method. And of course, what I want to provide here is just a reference to taco card. That is going to be the component that is going to be dynamically injected right here. Notice that I'm not rendering it, so I'm not providing the curly bracket syntax and the slash because I don't want a taco card component instance. I just want a reference to that component. And here is where we actually have the bracket syntax to create that component dynamically on line 3 in food items. So I'm simply providing a reference to the component, which at the end of the day just means we're passing down a function, right? Because taco card is a functional component. It is a function that returns JSX. So we are passing in the uninvoked function, the component template, if you will, and right here is where we're actually going to render it, right? And then we're going to self-close the food items component, and that allows us to replace this right here. And then I'm going to do the same thing for burritos. So right here, I'm going to say food items. And then for the items array, I'm going to pass down the burritos array. And we also need a component prop for this render of the second food items component. And of course, the component I want to dynamically inject here is going to be burrito card instead. So that allows us to remove this code right here, save that, and there we go. So now we have a reusable food items component whose responsibility it is to take an array of objects and generate an array of components from it, but the component that it generates can be dynamically provided by the parent. And tomorrow, if, for example, we introduce 5 other cards for 5 different food items, this component can continue to play the role of mapping over an array and producing an array of some kind of component. It is flexible enough to be used in other use cases in the future. So with that said, let's scroll up. We no longer need tacos or burritos in this file, and as it turns out, we no longer need them in our code base either because food items can replace both of them. So right here, I'm going to delete the tacos file, delete that file, and also delete the burritos file, and make sure you keep your burrito card and taco card files because those are still being used right here to pass down for the component prop of our new food items component. And with that, the only thing that's left to do is head to the browser and verify that everything is still working. So right here, I'm going to go to Chrome, refresh the page, and everything is still working. Let's take a look at the React developer tools. So I'm going to right click, go to inspect, and then open up the components tab right here. And take a look. Here is our food items component. In fact, here are both of them rendering at the very top. The first one is taking care of the 3 tacos. The second one is taking care of the 2 burritos. And because we specified a component prop of a taco card, that is exactly what it is rendering for all 3 objects that we provide via the items prop. For our second food items component render, we passed in a component prop value of burrito card, so that is what it is rendering, a totally different component of burrito card right here, right? So if I click into food items here, we can actually see right here that here is our items array of the actual tacos themselves, and here is the component prop, and all it is our taco card function. It is our functional component. It is our template, right? It's not the invoked function, or in similar terminology, it's not the rendered component. It's just the recipe for a component. It's just the template. It's the uninvoked function. It is actually in the body of our food items component in that map method where we're going to create 3 taco cards as the map method works over the items array and generates the corresponding JSX, right? And then the exact same logic is going to repeat in our second food items component. Here is our array of 2 objects, and we are passing in a prop of component representing our burrito card component or our uninvoked burrito card function. And then as we call the map method, that's the point where React is actually going to create 2 burrito card components for the 2 objects within the items array, right? And so we have this beautiful design where we have the ability to inject whatever dynamic React component we want to play the role of the card, or really anything, right? It can be any component that has a name and an image prop. It doesn't have to be burrito card and taco card. You're more than welcome to provide anything else. And we're simply going to be able to render that dynamically, creatively within the food items component. So once again, the goal of the last couple of lessons has been to show you these kinds of clever techniques, these kinds of dynamic React patterns, if you will, that show you that a component's return value doesn't always have to be just strict JSX. It doesn't have to be a top-level div, right? It can be much more creative. It can be an array generated by the map method. It can be a dynamic component that is rendered a certain amount of times, right? As long as you're providing something to return at the end of the day that will ultimately end up on the screen, React will be fine. But as we can see, there's a lot of different nuances and caveats as to what that JSX will be and how it's going to be generated. And hopefully this example kind of inspires you to start thinking about the cool ways that we can structure our components and our logic within our React applications. That's all there is to cover in this lesson, so I will see you in the next one.